We're going to quickly look at graphics. So let's go into the graphics layout. There's several different ways to begin building a graphic. You can just say, for instance, grab the type tool and start typing on a layer. And once you do that, you will have, of course, a graphic. The thing that I think is most important here is that once you've built a graphic, no matter what it is that you've created, that once you've got that graphic there, you double click on it, you'll be able to get a list of graphics. Say, for instance, if you want to, you can copy a graphic and make another version of it somewhere else, and they'll have whatever names you want them to have. You can change the contents of them very quickly. If you need to make a couple graphics, they're not linked, so you can just change them as you wish, right? By default, what you'll notice is that the text in them, pardon me, is left justified, which isn't necessarily super useful all the time. If you want to change the justification of what you're doing, you can change it here. If you want to double check that it is centered in your screen, because maybe you want something centered in your screen, you can do that here. If you want to reduce that bounding box so that it feels more centered, you can do that as well. Every situation is different and every graphic is different, but right now this graphic is the most ostentatious graphic. Actually, no, let's make it more ostentatious. Let's make it real fun. So when you are using the graphic tool, you can, of course, create a lot of different colors. It will warn you when the color you're creating is either just too unattractive. No, it's actually just about luminance and what it feels is appropriate. But you can make a lot of stuff. So right now you can see I've got a fill and I've got 2 strokes. So the stroke is kind of like an outline, and you can, of course, choose whatever it is that you want. So as you would use a color selection tool in any other software, you can certainly do that here. I don't necessarily advocate this kind of unattractive graphic, but it's important to know that you can do all kinds of things if you want. So say, for instance, you wanted to have a background to the graphic, and you wanted it to be, this. You can see right here that is going to build out from the center, and then we can put curves on that or whatever. So if you didn't want to necessarily think about building a ribbon per se, but you wanted to have some kind of thing, you can do that. And if you want to, you can, of course, mask with text, which turns everything off. You can create a shadow for elements and do whatever you want. But it's not all this stuff is here, and you can use it as you wish. As for fonts themselves, my advice to you, let me just turn these guys off for a second and go back to something a little bit less terrifying. Something close to white. I don't usually use 100% white. It tends to be super bright and sad. But the other thing I don't tend to use is fonts that don't make a lot of sense. I will not generally advocate for a font where it goes from very, very wide to very narrow. They tend to be harder to read, especially against video material. So bear that in mind. The other thing I try to do is I do prefer most of the times for standard stuff, fonts that have a very similar and consistent width. Fonts that are really easy to read, because you've got to remember you're putting graphics on screen for only a couple of seconds. They need to be parsable. You have to be able to understand what they say. It doesn't mean that you can't have personality in a font. I mean, this font is easy to read. It's just very specific in terms of its idiom per se. It's got a mood going on. You want to make sure that you can choose a font that is firstly legible and secondly, hopefully, gives a sense of dimension to what you're trying to communicate. So choose a font that works for you, but choose a font that works primarily. When you're building graphics, what you really want to make sure you do is consider having only, say, 3 words, 3 seconds. So I'm just going to make that font weensy. Hopefully that's going to become small. So I'm just going to make that. You can numerically change that. I think this is really important in fact, I will outline that so that you can see it better. Oh, look at that. Look at that stroke. Hot diggity, that looks horrible. But here's the thing. This is really important. For every 3 words that you want to put on screen, you have to allow 3 seconds for a person to process that material. It's not because it takes a really long time to read, but we underestimate the value of letting people see words, understand them, recognize them, and process them. So this is really critical. If you've got more words than that, it really depends on complexity. I would try to make sure that you're not cluttering the screen with a whole bunch of words, especially against video material. If it's on a slide where you don't have that, say you've got another thing going on, say I've brought a file in, like a digital background. This is hierarchical, so you have to arrange your layers. So if I want that to be at the bottom, that's where it's going to be. Just know that, even when you have a slide where it's got, something happening in the background like this, you still want to be able to pay attention to the words, have them at a size that's reasonable, and have them on screen long enough to make sense. So that's very important. So getting back to the whole sort of nuts and bolts of making graphics rather than these issues of what happens inside them, there's a few other things that are probably worth exploring here. If I make a shape in this graphic, let me just open this up and use this, say, shape tool. Hello, shape tool. I can make a shape in my graphic. Oof, pardon me. And let me just scooch this over yonder. So say, for instance, I just want that to be a graphic there, and I'm going to put this down here, and I'm going to use it as a mask, and I'm going to just align it a bit better with my whatever it is, be like that. We can just do that if we want to, that's fine. So I can make a kind of banner. I can arrange it so that it's like a lower third. I can then take that text and, do whatever I want and be like, this is what it is, and shove it over yonder. So maybe this is my banner, maybe the material inside or anything else about it. So I can do stuff like this. Once you kind of set up a graphic, whether it's got one element or several elements, let me just get rid of that thing that we don't need. There's more and more and more stuff that we can do. So in order to explore some of the other things that we can do, I am just going to quickly go to the effect controls. So what's important to note when we are looking at the graphic is that there's several things that we can control. We can control the overall position of the graphic, and we can reset that parameter if we have made a boo-boo and we want to change things. We can change the scale, rotation, all kinds of stuff. We can also individually make changes to elements within the graphic, right? So all of the controls that we have over here are also hiding in here. So if I wanted to just come in here and do something, I can do that. I have a sneaking suspicion that I've done something to my scale or something. Let me just change that back. I'm not sure what's happened. It doesn't really matter. So you can see also that there is a position for the text and a scale for the text. And once again, if I don't like something I've changed, I can always reset it. I'm noting that the reset will take it to the center of the screen at its anchor point. So that may not work to an advantage if, I'm not suggesting it's pretty, but I am suggesting it's a graphic. As well as the shape. The shape itself has a position as well. Pardon me. Where did it go? It went there. So if I change the position of this, I can do that too. Now the thing I think that's really interesting here is the clip has motion and scale too. And what's interesting is that when we go down here, we can move the whole thing again, which is a little bit interesting because it's the video clip underneath the graphics, which is probably a little bit, well, let's just say it's a kind of nesting doll of sorts. There's just a lot of controls. And so, for example, because these are the normal video tools, you can, if you want to, say, for instance, all you want to do is change opacity over time and change something over time with all the elements. You could just use the video rather than touching the graphics. But let's just go back in here to the clip. Because what you'll notice here is that we can move the clip without moving the shape. And this in and of itself is a little bit interesting. So what happens when you're moving one element and another element's inside it? If, say, for example, all I wanted to do was to create an animation whereby, say, by this point in the clip, this was fully evolved, I could go into the position tool, click my stopwatch, which is a way of setting a keyframe, go back to the start of the graphic, and then just change something, maybe that, or maybe I want to do something a little more standard and move it in from, say, the left-hand side. I can do that. Now, when I do that just to this element, you can see that it's evolving and coming in. So one of the things that often happens is you'll bring this sort of element in, and then what you'll do is as you're bringing that in, you might fade up your text. So you might go into the opacity tool and say I want that to be 0. And then maybe once this is at this point, I want it to be 100. And in that case, I mean, regardless of how beautiful these graphics are,
How long do I have to come up with them?
it doesn't make them attractive. But you can see that there's a kind of standard sense of form. And when you play it in real time,
How long do I have
you can figure out whether or not what you're doing takes a really long time, and then you can start making adjustments. And yeah, sure, that's a huge amount of time. It's like half of the time is would probably be better. But when you start playing with this tool, if what you're trying to do is set up a graphic, it doesn't matter if it's me trying to constantly remind you that you should let people read things for a very long time with the most unattractive graphic I've ever made in my life. The reality is that you can also snap. So if you want these things to be aligned, you can do that. You want to be able to come into this tool and feel as though you can control what's happening. If, say, for example, what you wanted was to move the shape and the clip together, you can actually turn them into a group. So if I grab the layers inside the graphic, I can group them. And once I've made the group, I could, instead of having this this here, I can always just turn this stopwatch off, which will get rid of all of those keyframes, and apply it at a higher level. And then if you apply it to the group, it's a different situation. But that's why we disappeared. All right, let's get back over yonder. I've touched the wrong thing. But it's a really good way of knowing where are you, because you can set the stopwatch, make your little changes that you want to make, whatever they are. It'll make another. If you're curious as to where something is, you can use these to navigate. And if you've done something that's like a bit of a boo-boo, you can very quickly find it, because you can say, oh, I've set the stopwatch on the wrong thing. You can go back and change it. So now we have
How long do I...
that, whatever that is. And, this is not suggesting that you have to make a graphic that is as beautiful and complicated as this is. But I wanted to make sure that you understood how this tool works, because it is using the effects controls to allow you to make all sorts of changes here not only to the graphics, but also to the video layer. And because the video layer controls everything that appears as well as the graphics, if I say, for instance, were to take this opacity down to 0, everything goes away because the video is kind of like hierarchically above anything else, but in this software, it actually visibly appears below the graphics because the assumption is you want to work on the settings of the graphics. I know that that's probably a lot of information, but I think that if I don't explain it, it probably won't make a great deal of sense. Hopefully that helps you understand a little bit about the graphics tool. You can explore this to whatever extent you wish. There's also a lot of templates that are available in case you don't necessarily feel comfortable with playing with this and just want some basic title that you can use. Just, do what works for you. Do what makes you feel like you're in control of what you're creating. And I hope that you can have a bit of fun because graphics are challenging, but also very, very, very rewarding if you can get them working nicely.